The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Tom stood in the doorway of Emma's room, watching his daughter sleep peacefully. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow on her face, so much like her mother's. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a mixture of love and loss that had become his constant companion since Sarah's passing. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. As he turned away from Emma's room, Tom's gaze fell on the family photos lining the hallway. Each image was a stark reminder of the vibrant life that once filled their home. Sarah's smile, forever frozen in time, seemed to follow him as he made his way to the attic stairs. He climbed them slowly, each step heavy with purpose and memory. The attic was a time capsule of their life together. Boxes of Sarah's belongings were stacked neatly against the walls, each one a treasure trove of memories. Tom's hand brushed against a cardboard box labeled Sarah's Clothes, and he paused, allowing himself a moment to remember. The soft fabrics, the lingering scent of her perfume, the way she looked in each outfit. It all came rushing back in a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. In the corner of the attic stood Sarah's old sewing machine, a wedding gift from her grandmother. It had been gathering dust since her passing, but tonight, Tom approached it with determination. He'd been planning this project for weeks, gathering the courage to begin. As he sat down at the machine, he felt a connection to Sarah that he hadn't experienced in months. Tom began to sort through Sarah's clothes, carefully selecting pieces that held special significance: a floral dress from their first date, a cozy sweater she wore on lazy Sundays, the blouse she had on when Emma took her first steps. Each item told a story, and as Tom worked, he found himself whispering these stories aloud, as if Sarah could hear him. "Remember this one, Sarah?" he murmured, holding up a vibrant red scarf. "You wore it on our trip to Paris. Emma was just a baby then." He chuckled softly, recalling how Sarah had used the scarf to play peekaboo with Emma on the long flight. As the night wore on, Tom's fingers grew more confident with the sewing machine. The steady rhythm of the needle-piercing fabric became a comforting soundtrack to his memories. He imagined Sarah watching over him, guiding his hands as he worked to create something beautiful from the remnants of her life. In the quiet of the attic, Tom allowed himself to dream of conversations that would never happen. He pictured Sarah sitting with Emma, sharing mother-daughter moments that fate had cruelly denied them. "She's growing up so fast, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room. "I wish you could see her now. She has your spirit, your kindness." The project took shape slowly, each stitch a testament to Tom's love for both his wife and daughter. As he worked, he found a strange sense of peace washing over him. For the first time since Sarah's passing, he felt like he was doing something truly meaningful, something that would bridge the gap between past and present, between mother and daughter. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the attic window, Tom set aside his work for the night. He carefully folded the partially completed project and tucked it away in a drawer. Tomorrow night, he would continue, weaving together memories and love into something tangible, something Emma could hold on to. Descending the attic stairs, Tom felt lighter than he had in months. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. Instead, it was filled with the echoes of laughter, love, and the promise of a connection that even death couldn't sever. As he crawled into bed for a few hours of sleep before Emma woke, Tom smiled to himself. For the first time in a long while, he was looking forward to what the future might bring. Emma stirred in her bed, awakened by an unfamiliar sound. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the darkness of her room. The faint, rhythmic hum of machinery drifted down from above, piquing her curiosity. She glanced at her bedside clock, 2:37 a.m., What could her father be doing at this hour? Sliding out of bed, Emma tiptoed across her room, careful not to make a sound. The wooden floor creaked slightly under her feet as she made her way to the hallway. The noise grew louder as she approached the attic stairs, confirming her suspicion that it was coming from up there. With each step up the stairs, Emma's heart raced a little faster. She'd always found the attic a bit creepy, especially at night. But her concern for her father outweighed her fear. As she reached the top of the stairs, she noticed a sliver of light escaping from beneath the attic door. Emma hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Should she knock? Should she just go back to bed and pretend she hadn't heard anything? Before she could decide, she caught the sound of her father's voice, soft and low, as if he were talking to someone. Pressing her ear against the door, Emma strained to make out the words. She could hear the steady whir of what she now recognized as her grandmother's old sewing machine, punctuated by her father's murmurs. Was he telling stories? Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. She'd never known her father to sew, let alone in the middle of the night. And who was he talking to? The questions swirled in her mind, mixing with a growing sense of unease. Gathering her courage, Emma slowly turned the doorknob, careful not to make a sound. She pushed the door open just a crack, enough to peer inside with one eye. The sight that greeted her was both familiar and strange. Her father sat hunched over the sewing machine, his back to the door. Scattered around him were piles of fabric that Emma recognized as her mother's old clothes. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. These were the clothes they'd packed away after her mother's death, too painful to look at, but too precious to discard. As Emma watched, her father picked up a blue blouse, running his fingers over the fabric with a tenderness that made her throat tighten. She heard him speak again, his voice thick with emotion. "Remember this one, Sarah? You were wearing it the day we brought Emma home from the hospital." Emma's heart skipped a beat. He was talking to her mother, as if she were there in the room with him. A mix of emotions washed over her: sadness for her father's grief, confusion about what he was doing, and a twinge of worry about his mental state. She continued to observe, torn between the desire to comfort her father and the fear of interrupting what seemed to be a deeply personal moment. As she watched him work, methodically cutting and stitching, Emma couldn't help but wonder what he was making. Whatever it was, it seemed to involve a lot of her mother's old clothes. The longer Emma stood there, the more questions formed in her mind. Was this a healthy way for her father to cope with his grief? Or was it a sign that he was struggling more than she realized? She'd noticed him being more distant lately, often lost in thought. Now she understood where his mind had been wandering. A part of Emma felt a pang of jealousy. Her father seemed to be finding a way to connect with her mother's memory, while Emma herself felt increasingly disconnected. She had been so young when her mother died. Her memories were hazy at best. Watching her father now, she felt the loss anew, mourning not just her mother, but the relationship they never had the chance to build. As the night wore on, Emma found herself unable to leave her post at the door. She watched as her father worked tirelessly, his hands moving with surprising skill over the fabric. Occasionally, he would pause, lost in a memory, before shaking himself and returning to his task with renewed determination. By the time the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Emma's legs were stiff from standing so long. She watched as her father carefully folded up his project and tucked it away in a drawer. As he turned towards the door, Emma quickly and quietly made her way back to her room, her mind racing with everything she had seen. Lying in bed, Emma stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She felt as though she had stumbled upon a secret world, one where her father could still talk to her mother. It left her feeling both comforted and unsettled. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Emma resolved to keep a closer eye on her father. Whatever he was doing up there in the attic, she was determined to find out more. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime echoing through the house. Tom smoothed down his shirt and plastered on a smile before opening the door to greet his mother-in-law, Margaret. "Tom, dear," Margaret said, enveloping him in a warm hug. "How are you holding up?" Tom's smile faltered slightly. "We're managing, Margaret, one day at a time." As they walked into the living room, Emma bounded down the stairs, her face lighting up at the sight of her grandmother. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, rushing into Margaret's open arms. Margaret held her granddaughter tightly, her eyes meeting Tom's over Emma's head. "I've been thinking," she began, her tone cautious. "Perhaps it's time we started having regular family gatherings to share memories of Sarah, keep her spirit alive for Emma." Tom felt a knot form in his stomach. The idea of reliving memories of Sarah with others seemed both appealing and terrifying. He'd been so focused on his secret project, on preserving Sarah's memory in his own way, that the thought of opening up to others hadn't crossed his mind. I don't know, Margaret." He hesitated, glancing at Emma, who was watching the exchange with curious eyes. Margaret reached out, placing a gentle hand on Tom's arm. "Just think about it, dear. It might be good for all of us, especially Emma." Tom nodded, not committing but not refusing outright. The seed had been planted, and over the next few days, he found himself mulling over the idea more and more. A week later, Tom surprised himself by agreeing to host the first family gathering. As relatives began to arrive, bringing dishes and warm hugs, he felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The living room filled with the buzz of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter. Tom stood slightly apart, a glass of wine in his hand, watching as Emma moved from one relative to another, soaking in stories about her mother. Aunt Susan was in the middle of recounting a tale from Sarah's college days when Tom felt himself being drawn in. And there was Sarah, covered head to toe in blue paint, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. A chuckle escaped Tom's lips before he could stop it. He remembered Sarah telling him this story, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she described her failed attempt at performance art. As the evening progressed, Tom found himself participating more, sharing his own stories and listening intently to others. Each anecdote, each shared memory, felt like a piece of Sarah coming back to life. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes wide as she absorbed every word. Tom watched her, noting the way she laughed at funny stories and leaned in during the more emotional ones. For the first time, he saw Sarah through his daughter's eyes, not just as a mother, but as a vibrant, complex woman with a life full of adventures and mishaps. Later, as the last guests were leaving, Tom found himself standing next to Margaret in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said softly. "This was good for all of us." Margaret squeezed his hand. "Sarah would be proud of you, Tom. You're doing right by Emma." That night, as Tom worked on his secret project in the attic, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stories he'd heard added new dimensions to the memories he was stitching together. He worked with a lighter heart, occasionally chuckling as he remembered a funny anecdote from the evening. In her room, Emma lay awake, her mind replaying the stories she'd heard. She felt closer to her mother than ever before, yet also acutely aware of the void her absence had left. The sound of the sewing machine drifted down from the attic, and Emma found herself wondering once again what her father was working on up there. As the nights went on, family gatherings became a regular occurrence. Each one brought new stories, new perspectives on Sarah's life. Tom found himself looking forward to these evenings, seeing them as a chance to celebrate Sarah rather than mourn her. Emma, too, began to change. She laughed more freely, asked more questions about her mother, and seemed to carry herself with a new confidence. Tom noticed her lingering gazes whenever Sarah was mentioned, the way she clung to every detail shared about her mother. One evening, after everyone had left, Emma approached Tom with tears in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wish I had known her better." Tom pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes welling up. "Me too, sweetheart. But remember, she's always with us. In our hearts, in our memories, and in you. You're so much like her, Emma. More than you know." As they stood there, embracing in the quiet of their home, Tom felt a shift. The weight of grief that had been crushing him for so long seemed to lift slightly. In its place was a bittersweet mix of love, loss, and hope. Upstairs, the unfinished project waited, a testament to Tom's love and dedication. But now, it felt like part of something bigger, a shared journey of remembrance and healing that involved not just him, but Emma and their entire family. As Emma's birthday approached, Tom felt a growing sense of urgency. The cozy attic, once a sanctuary of solitude, now buzzed with renewed purpose. Tom had decided that the patchwork quilt he'd been crafting from Sarah's clothes would be Emma's most meaningful birthday gift yet. Late one night, Tom sat at the sewing machine, his fingers working deftly as he joined another piece of fabric to the growing blanket. Each stitch felt like a promise, a tangible link between past and present. He paused, holding up the quilt to admire his progress. Sarah's favorite sundress, her cozy winter sweater, the blouse she wore on their last anniversary, all these pieces of her life were coming together in a tapestry of memories. "This is going to be perfect, Sarah," Tom whispered to the quiet room. "Emma will have a piece of you to hold on to." As dawn broke, Tom carefully folded the nearly finished quilt and tucked it away in its hiding spot. He descended the attic stairs, rubbing his tired eyes, only to find Emma already awake and in the kitchen. "Dad?" Emma's voice was laced with concern. "Have you been up all night again?" Tom forced a smile, trying to hide his exhaustion. "Just couldn't sleep, sweetheart. Thinking about your birthday plans." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly, unconvinced. "Dad, you know you can talk to me if something's bothering you, right?" Tom felt a pang of guilt. He hated keeping secrets from Emma, but the surprise of the quilt kept him silent. "Of course, Em, everything's fine, I promise." As he poured himself a cup of coffee, Tom noticed Emma's gaze lingering on him. The weight of her unasked questions hung in the air between them. Throughout the day, Tom's mind kept drifting to the quilt. He imagined Emma's reaction when she opened it, picturing her face lighting up as she recognized pieces of her mother's clothing. The thought gave him renewed energy, and he found himself constantly checking the time, eager for night to fall so he could return to his project. That evening, as Tom prepared dinner, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding something in her hand. Tom's heart skipped a beat when he realized what it was, a small scrap of fabric that must have fallen from his pocket. "Dad, I found this on the stairs," Emma said, her voice quiet. "Isn't this from Mom's old shirt?" Tom froze, his mind racing for an explanation. "Oh, that? It's nothing, Emma. Just an old piece of fabric I found while cleaning." Emma's expression was a mix of hurt and confusion. "Dad, why are you lying to me? I know you've been going up to the attic every night. What's going on?" The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he explain without ruining the surprise? "Emma, he began, but was cut off by the sound of the doorbell. Saved by the interruption, Tom quickly moved to answer the door. It was Margaret, stopping by with some old photo albums she'd found. As they looked through the albums together, Tom couldn't shake the feeling of Emma's eyes on him. The trust between them, once unshakable, now felt fragile. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Tom returned to the attic with renewed determination. He worked tirelessly, his fingers flying over the fabric as he raced to complete the quilt. Each stitch felt like an apology, a promise to bridge the growing gap between him and Emma. As he worked, Tom found himself talking to Sarah more than ever. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," he murmured. "I want to give her a piece of you, but I'm afraid I might be pushing her away in the process." The quilt grew larger, more beautiful with each passing hour. Tom poured all his love, his grief, and his hope into every stitch. By the time he finally set down the needle, the first light of dawn was peeking through the attic window. Tom held up the finished quilt, tears welling in his eyes. It was more than just a blanket. It was a testament to Sarah's life, a bridge between mother and daughter, past and present. As he carefully folded the quilt and wrapped it for Emma's birthday, Tom felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Would this gift heal the rift that had formed between them, or would it only serve to remind Emma of the mother she'd lost? With a deep breath, Tom tucked the wrapped gift away and headed downstairs to start the day. Emma's birthday was tomorrow, and with it would come the moment of truth. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he found Emma waiting for him, her eyes full of questions he wasn't ready to answer. The tension between them was palpable, a stark contrast to the joyous celebration that awaited. Tom could only hope that tomorrow, when the truth was finally revealed, it would bring them closer together rather than push them further apart. The familiar chime of the doorbell rang through the house, signaling the arrival of Margaret for another family gathering. As Tom opened the door, he was greeted by his mother-in-law's warm smile and the scent of her famous apple pie. "Tom, dear," Margaret said, embracing him. "How are the birthday preparations coming along?" Tom's smile wavered slightly. "They're coming along," he replied, his voice betraying a hint of the tension that had been building in the house. As they entered the living room, Emma looked up from her book, her face lighting up at the sight of her grandmother. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, rushing to give Margaret a hug. Margaret held her granddaughter tightly, her eyes meeting Tom's over Emma's head. She could sense the unspoken tension between father and daughter, and a look of concern crossed her face. As the evening progressed, the living room filled with the gentle hum of conversation and laughter. Stories of Sarah flowed freely, as they always did during these gatherings. But tonight, Margaret noticed Emma hanging on every word with renewed intensity. During a lull in the conversation, Margaret pulled out an old photo album from her bag. "Emma, sweetheart," she called, patting the seat next to her on the couch. "Come here. I have something special to show you." Emma settled in next to her grandmother, curiosity piqued. Margaret opened the album, revealing photos Emma had never seen before. "These are from your mother's childhood," Margaret explained, her voice soft with nostalgia. As they flipped through the pages, Margaret began to share stories that even Tom had never heard. She told Emma about Sarah's first day of school, how she'd insisted on wearing her favorite red shoes, despite them not matching her outfit. She recounted the time Sarah had climbed to the top of the tallest tree in the neighborhood, refusing to come down until she'd seen the sunset. "Your mother was always so brave," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. "She faced every challenge head-on, with a smile on her face." Emma leaned in closer, drinking in every detail. "Was she ever scared?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret nodded, her expression softening. "Oh, of course she was, dear. But do you know what she told me once? She said, 'Mom, being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing it anyway.'" Tom, who had been listening from across the room, felt his throat tighten. He'd never heard this side of Sarah before, had never thought to ask about her childhood fears and triumphs. As Margaret continued to share stories, Emma's eyes grew wide with wonder. She learned about her mother's first heartbreak, her dreams of becoming an artist, and the summer she spent volunteering at an animal shelter. With each story, Sarah became more than just a distant memory or a face in photographs. She became real, vibrant, human. "You know, Emma," Margaret said, gently squeezing her granddaughter's hand. "Your mother's strength and kindness live on in you. I see so much of her in your smile, in the way you care for others." Emma's eyes welled up with tears, a mix of joy and sadness washing over her. For the first time, she felt a deep connection to the mother she'd never truly known. "I wish I could have known her better," she murmured. Margaret pulled her into a tight hug. "Oh, my dear, you know her. She's a part of you, always has been, always will be." From his spot across the room, Tom watched the scene unfold, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. He saw the change in Emma's expression, the way she sat up straighter, as if embracing a new part of herself. As the evening drew to a close and Margaret prepared to leave, she pulled Tom aside. "Tom," she said softly, "I hope you don't mind me sharing those stories. I thought Emma might need to hear them." Tom shook his head, gratitude evident in his eyes. "No, Margaret. Thank you. I think we both needed to hear them." After Margaret left, Tom found Emma still on the couch, flipping through the photo album. He sat down next to her, tentatively placing an arm around her shoulders. To his relief, she leaned into him. "Dad," Emma said, her voice quiet but steady, "I think I understand Mom a little better now, and I think I understand you better too." Tom felt a weight lift from his chest. He pulled Emma closer, planting a kiss on the top of her head. "I'm glad, sweetheart. Your mom would be so proud of you. You know that?" As they sat there, surrounded by photos and memories of Sarah, the tension that had been building between them began to dissipate. In its place, a new understanding bloomed, bridging the gap that grief had created. Tom thought about the quilt hidden away in the attic, waiting to be given. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly confident about his gift. It wasn't just a blanket of memories anymore. It was a continuation of the story Margaret had started tonight, a tangible link to the mother Emma was just beginning to know. As Emma's birthday drew nearer, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. Tom's nightly disappearances to the attic became more frequent, and Emma's curiosity turned to concern. The warmth from the family gathering had faded, replaced by an unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. One evening, just 2 days before her birthday, Emma decided she couldn't bear the secrecy any longer. She waited until she heard the familiar creak of the attic stairs before making her move. Taking a deep breath, Emma climbed the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated at the door, the sound of the sewing machine humming steadily on the other side. Gathering her courage, she knocked firmly. The machine's rhythm abruptly stopped. "Dad?" Emma called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Can I come in?" There was a moment of silence, followed by the sound of shuffling and a drawer closing. "Just a minute, Emma," Tom's voice came through, sounding strained. When the door finally opened, Emma was struck by her father's appearance. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy about him. The attic behind him was a mess of fabric scraps and threads. "Emma, what are you doing up so late?" Tom asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the anxiety in his voice. Emma steeled herself, determined to get answers. "Dad, what's going on? You've been sneaking up here every night for weeks. I'm worried about you." Tom's eyes darted around the room, avoiding Emma's gaze. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just some old projects I've been working on." "Dad, please," Emma pleaded, her frustration mounting. "Stop lying to me. I found Mom's clothes scattered around. What are you doing with them?" Tom's shoulders sagged, the weight of his secret becoming too much to bear. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma recognized as a sign of his internal struggle. "Emma, he began, then faltered. How could he explain without ruining the surprise? But looking at his daughter's face, a mix of hurt and concern, He realized the damage his secrecy had already done. Emma pressed on, her voice growing stronger. "Is this about Mom? Are you having trouble letting go?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Tom felt a surge of emotions, guilt for worrying Emma, frustration at being misunderstood, and a deep, aching sadness for the loss they both still felt. "No, Emma, it's not like that," Tom said, his voice cracking. I'm not stuck in the past. I'm trying to preserve it. For you." Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Tom took a deep breath, realizing there was no turning back now. He stepped aside, gesturing for Emma to enter the attic. As she did, her eyes widened at the sight of the sewing machine surrounded by piles of familiar fabric. "I've been working on something," Tom explained, his voice soft. "A gift for your birthday." Emma's gaze fell on a partially visible corner of the quilt, peeking out from a drawer. She moved towards it, her hand reaching out tentatively. Tom nodded, giving her permission to look. With trembling hands, Emma pulled out the quilt, gasping as she unfolded it, and recognized the pieces of her mother's clothing woven together. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You've been making this all this time?" Tom nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I wanted you to have something to remember her by, something you could hold on to." Emma ran her fingers over the familiar patterns and textures, memories flooding back with each touch. The blue dress her mother wore to her school play, the soft sweater she'd curl up in on cold nights, the vibrant scarf from their family vacation. A mix of emotions played across Emma's face. Joy at the beautiful gift, sadness at the memories it evoked, and a lingering hurt from the weeks of secrecy. "Dad, why didn't you just tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought it would mean more that way. I'm sorry, Emma. I never meant to make you worry." Emma looked up at her father, seeing the love and exhaustion in his eyes. She understood now, the late nights, the secrecy, the evasive answers. It had all been for her. "It's beautiful, Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you didn't have to do this alone. We could have done it together." Tom pulled Emma into a tight hug, feeling the tension of the past weeks dissolve. "You're right," he murmured into her hair. "I should have included you. I'm sorry." As they stood there, surrounded by the remnants of Sarah's life and the product of Tom's labor, a new understanding formed between them. The quilt, meant to be a bridge to the past, had become a symbol of their present, a testament to love, memory, and the unbreakable bond between father and daughter. Emma pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "So, what do we do now? My birthday's in 2 days, and you've ruined the surprise," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Tom chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "Well, how about we finish it together? There's still some work to be done." Emma nodded, her smile growing. "I'd like that, Dad. I'd like that a lot." As they sat down at the sewing machine together, Tom showing Emma how to guide the fabric, they both felt a shift. The secret project that had caused so much tension had transformed into a shared journey of healing and remembrance. And as they worked side by side, adding the final touches to the quilt, they knew that Sarah was there with them, her memory alive in every stitch. The morning of Emma's birthday dawned bright and clear. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the house that had been a battleground of emotions just days before. Now, it hummed with an air of anticipation and reconciliation. Tom woke early, his mind racing with last-minute preparations. As he made his way downstairs, he paused at Emma's door, listening for any signs of movement. Silence. she was still asleep. In the kitchen, Tom busied himself preparing Emma's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with whipped cream. As he mixed the batter, he found himself humming softly, a tune Sarah used to sing while cooking. For the first time in a long while, the memory brought a smile to his face, rather than a pang of sadness. Upstairs, Emma stirred, the scent of pancakes rousing her from sleep. She stretched, her hand brushing against something soft. The quilt. They had finished it late last night, working side by side in comfortable silence, punctuated by shared memories and quiet laughter. Now it lay draped over her, a patchwork of love and remembrance. As Emma made her way downstairs, she was greeted by the sight of her father, apron-clad, flipping pancakes with exaggerated flair. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Tom exclaimed, his face breaking into a wide grin. Emma couldn't help but laugh. "Thanks, Dad," she said, wrapping him in a tight hug. The tension that had defined their interactions over the past weeks had dissipated, replaced by a newfound closeness. As they sat down to breakfast, Tom cleared his throat. "So, about the party this afternoon?" Emma nodded, her mouth full of pancake. They had decided to go ahead with the small gathering they had planned, inviting close family and a few of Emma's friends. "I was thinking," Tom continued, "maybe we could show them the quilt. If you're comfortable with that, of course." Emma considered for a moment, then smiled. "I'd like that, Dad. I think Mom would like that too." As the morning progressed, they worked together to decorate the house. Balloons were inflated, streamers were hung, and old photo albums were placed strategically around the living room. The quilt, carefully folded, waited on the coffee table, ready to be unveiled. The first guests began to arrive shortly after noon. Aunt Susan brought a homemade cake. Uncle Mike arrived with an armful of presents, and Emma's best friend, Lily, came bouncing in with excitement. Margaret was the last to arrive, her arms laden with more photo albums and a box of Sarah's old trinkets she thought Emma might like. As the house filled with chatter and laughter, Tom found himself watching Emma. She moved from guest to guest, her face alight with joy, accepting hugs and well wishes with grace. He saw Sarah in her smile, in the way she threw her head back when she laughed. The time came for Emma to open her presents. She received books, art supplies, and a beautiful necklace from Margaret. But everyone could sense that there was something more, something special, yet to come. Finally, Tom stood up, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "Before we have cake," he began, his voice slightly shaky, "there's something Emma and I would like to share with you all." Emma moved to stand beside her father, their hands intertwining as they faced their family and friends. Tom continued, "As you all know, the past few years haven't been easy for us. We've struggled with the loss of Sarah, trying to find ways to keep her memory alive." He paused, taking a deep breath. Emma squeezed his hand, offering silent support. "Recently, I started a project, something to help Emma feel closer to her mother. But what began as a solitary endeavor became something much more meaningful when Emma and I finished it together." With that, Emma reached for the folded quilt on the coffee table. Together, she and Tom unfolded it, holding it up for everyone to see. There was a collective gasp as recognition dawned on their faces. It's Sarah's clothes," Margaret whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Emma nodded, her own eyes glistening. "Dad made it for me. We finished it together." As their guests gathered around to look closer, running their hands over the familiar fabrics, the room filled with a mix of laughter and tears. Stories began to flow, each patch of fabric triggering a memory, a moment shared with Sarah. In that moment, surrounded by love and wrapped in the tangible memories of her mother, Emma felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in years. She looked up at her father, seeing the same emotion reflected in his eyes. The quilt, born from secretive late nights and tear-stained fabric, had become more than just a gift. It was a bridge between past and present, between mother and daughter, between grief and healing. As Emma stood there, her father's arm around her shoulders, she knew that this birthday marked not just another year, but the beginning of a new chapter. The house, once quiet and heavy with unspoken words, now resonated with the warmth of shared memories and newfound understanding. And somewhere, Emma was sure, her mother was smiling. As the afternoon wore on, the initial excitement of the quilt reveal began to settle into a comfortable warmth. Guests mingled, sharing stories and laughter, the quilt serving as a centerpiece for conversation and remembrance. Emma found herself drifting between groups, soaking in the memories and anecdotes about her mother. Each story, each recollection, added another layer to the image of Sarah she was building in her mind. It was bittersweet, the joy of learning more about her mother tinged with the sadness of what she had missed. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the living room, Tom caught Emma's eye. It was time for the cake. With a nod, Emma began to usher everyone into the dining room. The lights dimmed, and Tom appeared, carrying a beautifully decorated cake adorned with flickering candles. As he set it down in front of Emma, the room burst into a chorus of "Happy Birthday." Emma's eyes sparkled in the candlelight, a mix of emotions playing across her face. Before she could blow out the candles, Tom raised his hand, asking for silence. "Before we cut the cake," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I'd like to say a few words." The room fell quiet, all eyes on Tom. He cleared his throat, looking directly at Emma. "Sweetheart, 16 years ago, your mother and I were blessed with the most precious gift we could have ever imagined. You. Sarah. She loved you more than anything in this world." Tom paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "I know these past few years haven't been easy. We've both been trying to find our way without her. But Emma, watching you grow into the amazing young woman you are today, I see so much of your mother in you. Her kindness, her strength, her spirit, it all lives on in you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as Tom continued. "The quilt we made together, it's more than just a blanket. It's a reminder of where you come from, of the love that surrounds you, and of the incredible person you're becoming. Your mother would be so proud of you, Emma. I know I am." With that, Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "There's one more thing," he said, handing it to Emma. "This was your mother's. She always said she wanted you to have it when you turned 16. With trembling hands, Emma unwrapped the box. Inside was a delicate silver locket. As she opened it, she gasped. On one side was a tiny photo of Sarah, smiling brightly. On the other, an inscription. "To my Emma, always with you, forever in my heart." The room was silent as Emma stared at the locket, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She looked up at her father, words failing her. Tom stepped forward, gently taking the locket and fastening it around her neck. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. The emotional weight of the moment hung in the air, palpable to everyone in the room. Margaret was the first to break the silence, raising her glass. "To Emma," she said, her voice wavering slightly, "and to Sarah, who lives on in all of us." A chorus of "To Emma and Sarah" echoed through the room as glasses clinked together. Emma, still wrapped in her father's arms, felt a surge of emotions: love, loss, gratitude, and a deep connection to the mother she was coming to know through the memories of others. As the party resumed its celebratory tone, Emma found herself drifting towards the living room. She stood before the quilt, her fingers tracing the familiar patterns of her mother's clothes. The locket felt warm against her skin, a tangible link to the woman who had given her life. Lost in thought, she didn't notice Tom approach until he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Emma turned, her eyes meeting her father's. In that moment, something shifted between them. The last vestiges of tension from the past weeks melted away, replaced by a deep understanding and shared love. "Yeah, Dad," Emma replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think I am," as they stood there, father and daughter, surrounded by the warmth of family and friends, and wrapped in the tangible memories of Sarah. Both felt a sense of peace they hadn't experienced in years. The journey of grief and healing was far from over, but they would face it together, stronger and more connected than ever before. The birthday party continued around them, filled with laughter, tears, and shared memories, and at its heart stood Emma, wearing her mother's locket, surrounded by the patchwork of love that was so much more than just a quilt. As the last of the party guests trickled out, offering final birthday wishes and warm hugs, Emma found herself overwhelmed by the day's events. The house, now quiet save for the soft clinking of dishes as Tom cleaned up in the kitchen, felt different somehow, as if the air itself had been changed by the outpouring of memories and emotions. Emma wandered into the living room, her fingers absently tracing the outline of the locket around her neck. The quilt lay draped over the back of the couch, a kaleidoscope of familiar fabrics in the soft evening light. She stood before it, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings. The day had been beautiful, filled with laughter and tears, stories and remembrances. And yet, as the excitement faded, Emma felt a hollow ache growing in her chest. The stories, the quilt, the locket, they were all wonderful, but they also served as stark reminders of what she had lost, of the relationship she would never have. Lost in her thoughts, Emma didn't hear Tom enter the room. He watched her for a moment, noting the slump of her shoulders and the far-off look in her eyes. "Emma?" he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Emma turned, and Tom was struck by the conflict he saw in her expression. "Dad," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to feel." Tom moved closer, concern etched on his face. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma's fingers tightened around the locket. "Today was amazing. Learning all those stories about Mom, seeing how much everyone loved her, but it also made me realize how much I've missed, how much I'll never have with her." Tom felt a pang in his chest, recognizing the pain in his daughter's voice. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Oh, Emma." "And this," Emma continued, gesturing to the quilt. "It's beautiful, Dad. It really is. But it's not her. It's just pieces." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. "I know I should be grateful. I know I should feel closer to her. But right now, I just feel lost." Tom pulled Emma into a tight embrace, feeling her body shake with silent sobs. His own eyes stung with unshed tears as he struggled to find the right words. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured into her hair. "It's okay to feel this way." They stood like that for a long moment, the weight of their shared loss hanging heavy between them. When Emma finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, Tom saw a mixture of sadness and frustration in her gaze. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her voice hoarse. "I don't mean to be ungrateful. I know how hard you worked on the quilt, and the party was wonderful. You don't have to apologize, Emma," Tom interrupted gently. "Grief isn't a straight line. It's okay to have good days and bad days, to feel happy one moment and sad the next." Emma nodded, but Tom could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. He felt a familiar sense of helplessness wash over him. How could he bridge this gap? How could he help his daughter connect with a mother she barely remembered? "You know," Tom said, his voice thoughtful. Your mom used to say that the hardest part of love was accepting that it doesn't always feel good. That sometimes, loving someone means feeling their absence just as strongly as their presence. Emma looked up at him, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She said that. Tom nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. She was wise like that, your mom. Always knew just what to say, even about the hard stuff. They fell into silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The quilt seemed to loom larger in the room, a physical manifestation of the memories and emotions that both connected and separated them. After a while, Emma spoke again, her voice small. Dad, do you think she'd be disappointed in me for not feeling the way I'm supposed to? Tom felt his heart break a little at the vulnerability in his daughter's voice. Oh, Emma, no, never. Your mom would understand exactly how you're feeling. She'd probably wrap you up in a big hug and tell you it's all part of the journey. A ghost of a smile flickered across Emma's face, but it faded quickly. The connection they had felt earlier in the day seemed fragile now, strained by the weight of expectations and unspoken fears. As they stood there, father and daughter, surrounded by the tangible reminders of Sarah's life, both felt the sharp edge of their loss anew. The journey of grief and healing stretched out before them, a path neither was sure how to navigate. Tom squeezed Emma's shoulder gently. We'll figure this out together, okay? One day at a time. Emma nodded, leaning into her father's side. The room fell quiet again, filled with the bittersweet mix of love, loss, and the tentative hope of a connection not quite lost, but not yet fully found. As the evening wore on, Emma found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day replayed in her mind, a whirlwind of emotions that left her feeling both drained and restless. She tossed and turned, the quilt wrapped around her, its familiar textures both comforting and unsettling. Finally giving up on sleep, Emma sat up in bed. Her fingers absently traced the patterns of the quilt, feeling the different fabrics that made up the patchwork of her mother's life. As her hand moved over a particular square, a piece of her mother's favorite blouse, she felt something odd, a small lump, barely noticeable, hidden within the folds of the fabric. Curiosity piqued, Emma carefully examined the square. In the dim moonlight filtering through her window, she could just make out a tiny, nearly invisible seam. With trembling fingers, she gently pried it open. To her surprise, a small envelope fell out, yellowed with age, but perfectly preserved within the quilt. Emma's heart raced as she picked it up, turning it over in her hands. On the front, in elegant handwriting she recognized from old birthday cards, was written, "For Emma, on her 16th birthday." Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was her mother's handwriting. With shaking hands, she carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a folded letter. As she unfolded it, a small photograph fluttered to the bed, a picture of her mother, radiant and clearly pregnant, her hands resting lovingly on her swollen belly. Tears welling in her eyes, Emma began to read. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to celebrate your 16th birthday with you. I'm writing this letter as I feel you kicking inside me, full of life and promise, and I'm filled with so much love for you already. I don't know what the future holds, my sweet girl, but I want you to know that you are loved beyond measure. Every day that I carried you, every moment since you came into this world, you have been the light of my life. I hope that your father has given you the quilt we planned together. Each piece of fabric holds a memory, a piece of my life that I wanted to share with you. But this letter, my darling, holds the most important thing I could ever give you, my heart. Emma, I know that growing up without a mother must have been incredibly difficult. There might have been times when you felt alone, or angry, or confused. Please know that it was never my choice to leave you. If I could, I would be there for every skinned knee, every broken heart, every triumph and joy. But even though I'm not there physically, I am always with you. In the strength you find within yourself, in the kindness you show to others, in the love you give and receive. That's where I live on. Your father is an amazing man, and I know he's done his best to fill both roles. Be patient with him, Emma. He loves you more than anything in this world. As you step into young adulthood, remember this: you are capable of incredible things. You have my determination, your father's compassion, and a spirit that is uniquely your own. Embrace it all. I love you, my beautiful Emma, yesterday, today, and always. Mom. Emma's tears fell freely now, dotting the paper as she read and reread her mother's words. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a connection to her mother more vivid and real than she had ever experienced before. Clutching the letter to her heart, Emma rushed out of her room and down the hall to her father's bedroom. She knocked urgently, not caring about the late hour. A bleary-eyed Tom opened the door, immediately alert when he saw Emma's tear-stained face. "Emma, what's wrong?" Without a word, Emma threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. Confused but concerned, Tom held her tightly, stroking her hair as he had done when she was small. When Emma finally pulled back, she held up the letter, her eyes shining with a mix of tears and joy. "Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Mom left me a letter. In the quilt." Tom's eyes widened in surprise and recognition. "The letter. I had forgotten. Sarah wrote it before. I must have sewn it into the quilt without realizing." As Emma shared the contents of the letter with her father, both of them crying and laughing together, the gap that had seemed so insurmountable earlier began to close. The words of Sarah, reaching out from the past, served as a bridge, connecting them not just to her memory, but to each other. In that moment, wrapped in the quilt that now held an even deeper meaning, Emma felt the presence of her mother more strongly than ever before. The letter wasn't just words on a page, it was a tangible link to the woman who had loved her from the very beginning. As the night turned to dawn, father and daughter sat together, reading and rereading the letter, sharing memories and hopes for the future. The quilt, draped around their shoulders, was no longer just a collection of fabric pieces. It had become a living testament to the enduring power of love, a family heirloom that would continue to bring comfort and connection for years to come. Emma's 16th birthday, which had begun with uncertainty and ended in tears, had transformed into something beautiful and profound. She had received the most precious gift of all, her mother's words, her love, reaching across time to touch her heart and guide her forward. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the journey of grief and healing was far from over, but she no longer felt lost. With her mother's letter close to her heart and her father by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future might bring, carrying with her the love and strength of both her parents. The quilt, now even more precious, would remain a symbol of their family's resilience, a patchwork of memories, love, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all.